Morning is by Dr. Stephen.Trolove. He's a senior scientist at the Bioeconomy Science Institute. It's my first time introducing the new institute, so I had to think hard. And he's in the plant and food group. So I used to work with Stephen, and it's a great pleasure to have him here today. He'll be speaking on the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle on pipfruit tree health. Over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, I've got to get used to saying Bioeconomy Science Institute as well, but you'll probably hear me refer to plant and food research a lot since that was the group that did it. As well as my colleagues at Plant and Food Research, I'd also like to acknowledge AgFirst, who were out there in the mud sampling with us as well, and Fruition, Horticulture as well. We had colleagues helping from there with this research, and New Zealand Apples and Pears also were key in helping design this project. So after the cyclone, many growers were faced with this question: what do I do? Where do I start? If you look online, there's information and previous reports on what to do with pastoral land that's been flooded, but in terms of apples, very little information. And there was a widely dispersed message that if the trees stay flooded for 3 days, they're going to die, and people were panicking, thinking, how do I get rid of this water? What do I do? People were out there with shovels. And if you've ever tried to lift a shovel full of waterlogged soil, it's pretty heavy. You know, they're putting the RSE workers through this. People are driving bobcats down and trying to scoop up the slop. You ever tried to tip it out of the bucket? You know, it's so sticky. Compacting their soil, did they need to do that? So it's really important to document as much information about what strategies work well in orchards, and what don't, so that next time we can learn and get some key recommendations for growers about what they can do when faced with this daunting situation. So we met with New Zealand Apples and Pears, and we prioritised the orchard land into 3 main groups. There was some land that had been flooded, and then basically it had drained away. The water had drained away. It looked pretty good. We thought we won't worry about that. I think it's going to be pretty good. And then there was some land that had more than 30 centimetres of silt, some places up to over 1 metre of silt, and we thought, oh, that's written off. We're not going to focus on that. The growers aren't going to prioritise that. But what do we do with, there's a lot of land that's flooded with sort of 20, 30 centimetres of wet sediment just sitting there. Are those trees going to die? What do? We don't know. So we prioritised those areas to go out, take some measurements and collect some data. So we did 29 pipfruit orchards in that sort of 0 to 15 centimetres of, 0 to 30 centimetres of sediment. Plus we also did some orchards where there was water sitting there for a long time. We measured the depth of the sediment sitting on the top. We measured the presence of glaying. So for those of you who don't know, glaying is when your soil runs out of oxygen. It's pretty easy to see. It changes colour. It goes sort of this greeny, grey colour, and it's a sign that the soil environment is really unhealthy for roots. There's no oxygen there. We measured the depth of the water table so we can know, are those roots sitting in water or not. We scored the tree health. We looked at the drain flow. Are the drains flowing or not? Are they blocked up? And yeah, so we focused on those blocks with waterlogged or up to 30 centimetres of silt. We revisited the blocks later in the season, and then again at flowering next season, and again at harvest the following season. And we also surveyed the orchard managers to get some key learnings as what management practices have you done, what do you recommend, what worked well, what didn't, just to try and get as much information and learnings as we could, so that if and when it happens again, next time we'll be more prepared with what to do. So the 5 areas we had where we did the surveys, we sort of divided them into Tutaikuri, Fernhill, Twyford and Pakawhai. So those had sediment sitting on the surface up to 30 centimetres were our blocks that we measured. And then Havelock North also had some water come down and just sit there for a week or more, and we wanted to see, well, there's no sediment there, but what's the effect of this ponded water? So within 2 weeks we were out there taking measurements, and this is what we typically saw on a fine textured deposit of sediment, so that's sort of silt or clay, and it was anything from 1 to 30 centimetres thick. And you can see on the top, I've got a pointer here, I don't know. Clay sediment up here looks like greeny grey chocolate mousse. It's all glade, there's no oxygen there. But underneath the soil, we were surprised it wasn't also like sloppy chocolate mousse underneath. It appeared to have drained, obviously it's still at field capacity, but appeared to have drained fairly well. And the water table we found was sitting anywhere between 25 centimetres below the original soil surface down to below the depth that we dug to, so more than a metre depth. In fact, often we only dug to 60 centimetres, so sometimes the water table had drained quite well. The trees were generally healthy, but any fruit that had gone underwater, that fruit had gone soft within the 2 weeks and it was just dropping into the mud while we were walking around. If the sediment deposited on the top was sandy, we found that sediment had drained, so there wasn't this greeny grey sludgy stuff on the top. You can see it just looks like you're down at the beach with that sand. The original soil, we saw that was glade, where the vegetation, like the ground cover, was starting to rot. Of course, that requires oxygen, so we got glade patches around where the grass was dying. But the trees were healthy, we saw, but again, any fruit that had been submerged underwater was soft and dropping as well. The status of these orchards, we came back through in May to see what are they like now. So 7% of the blocks were destined to be ripped out. Most of these blocks, the growers were going to retire anyway. The growers had generally removed the sediment from above the graft union, to keep the cyan out of the sediment. So in some cases they'd taken the sediment down to the original ground level, and in some cases they just thought, well, as long as we get it below the graft union, so we don't get cyan rooting, that's going to be good enough for us. On the orchards where we had our survey blocks, so yeah, we'd established transects. We did 9 points within our survey. We surveyed tree health there. Sorry, I missed that out in the methodology. So we didn't do the whole orchard. We just did a part of it where the silt was sort of 0 to 30 centimetres. But on the whole orchard, the growers reported an average of 26% tree loss in those orchards. But just in our area where we were surveying, where we were monitoring our 63 trees along our transect, we got 3% tree loss in those transects. So it was a bit lower loss where we measured because we didn't go to the worst parts of the orchard, because we thought those would be written off anyway. And if the trees had survived, when we went back to survey the trees, generally they were pretty healthy. We did a tree health score, and our ill health score was 0.24. And our tree health score, we ranged it from 0 is healthy, so 0 ill health, and 4 was dead. So generally pretty healthy. This is the results of our transects when we went back to our transects. by harvest 2024, so they'd had a year and a bit to monitor what happened. Tree losses had gone up to 12%, so some attrition due to root diseases and that sort of thing. Tree losses had gone up to 12%. But yeah, the trees that weren't dead, generally healthy with our average ill health score of 0.2. Key lessons learnt. The good news was that apple trees were generally more tolerant to sediment inundation than expected. So yeah, those trees had been underwater for way more than 3 days, but yeah, generally most of them were still alive, so we were pretty stoked about that. But in general, we found that the effects of the cyclone, and in fact the whole wet season, had just exacerbated existing problems. So if you had a spot of disease, it got a lot worse. If you had a spot that was a wet patch in the orchard, you had a bigger wet patch in the orchard. Those sorts of things. As a general rule, if your orchard was beautifully drained and nice free draining soil before the flood, generally had pretty minor effects. We found higher tree losses in blocks with younger trees, so less than 5 years old, but especially those 1-year-old trees. They really didn't survive very well. So higher losses with 1-year-old or less. Had higher losses with blocks that had a high water table. So if the water table was within 45 centimetres of the soil surface, we had higher losses there compared with where the water table was found deeper in the profile. We generally had higher losses with less vigorous rootstocks, so things like M9. But yeah, a whole range of growers' reports regarding rootstocks, but in general, less vigorous rootstocks, higher losses. Some scion varieties, so sometimes the flood went up into the scion and they were covered with sediment. We find that, for example, Cyfresh had higher losses of trees with Cyfresh than, for example, Cylate, for example, seem to tolerate being inundated better. We had higher tree losses where the growers didn't apply phosphite or phosphorus acid. That protects them from Phytophthora. So fortunately, just about all the growers we talked to had applied it, but those that didn't had higher losses. And higher losses with the sediment left on for several months, as opposed to those who removed it pretty quickly within a few weeks. Higher losses on poorer draining soils, higher losses with heavier textured sediment deposits like silts and clays. Asking the growers, generally 68% of our growers, when we talked to them, they thought that the cyclone contributed to reduced yield, and 68% of those growers said that they had reduced yields. It was a bit hard to tell because the following season we had a cold snap and that affected fruit size, so the fruit size was smaller. So we left it up to the growers to try and tease out, which is a bit hard, were there lower yields, cyclone related or due to the cold season. But yeah, 68% of the growers felt that it was yields were lower due to the cyclone, and the reasons they gave were things like root damage. Some of them had lost trees. The bud quality was poorer, they found, following the cyclone. Other reasons they gave were more disease. They couldn't do their normal spray programs because the tree rows might have been filled with debris. They had less time for things like canker walks and that sort of thing. Last season's fruit harboured disease was another reason they gave. Yeah, Mary Horner, our pathologist, is a bit iffy about that, but that's the reason that some growers gave. More pests, for one reason, growers couldn't spray, and there was a lot of debris that pests could hide in. Some growers said the cyclone reduced the yields because they couldn't do their normal prune, because they had orchard access issues. And also, a number of growers had done a lighter chemical thinning because they weren't sure how the trees would respond to chemical thinning due to the fact that, they could be under a lot more stress than normal, so we've been cautious. So a lot of growers carried a lot heavier crop because they hadn't thinned. So it's smaller fruit, less income, but not necessarily less yield. So what are our recommendations should something like this happen in the future? Well, being a soil scientist, I'm very happy to recommend dig holes. You've got to dig holes to see what's going on under there. Where is that water table at? Is it shallow? Are my roots sitting in water? The soil glade, and try and get a picture for what your tree roots are sitting in. Get your drains checked to see if they're working or not. Just because water's coming out the end of a drain doesn't mean the whole drain length is working. It might only be draining out that last little bit. So check your drains. Apply phosphorus acid to protect your crop against Phytophthora and root diseases. Prioritise remediation for young trees over mature trees. If you're looking out at your flooded orchard, which block do I start on first? Your younger trees are going to suffer first. Prioritise those. Remove sediment to below the graft union so you don't get scion rooting. Cultivate the sediment as soon as possible. You see that clod of soil there, it's still glade inside 3 months later, so all that soil with no oxygen in it, it's not going to be very healthy, so the sooner you can break that down, get the oxygen into your soil, the healthier it's going to be. And another key is continue to soil and leaf test annually to monitor your tree nutrition, because especially if you've worked in a lot of the sediment, your soil test results could change quite a bit. The sediment had quite high pH, low phosphorus, so make sure you do your soil tests and make sure you match those up with leaf tests to see how's it affecting my tree nutrition. So, and finally, I want to acknowledge people who helped dig in the mud, collect those measurements, and also thanks to the growers who let us on their property in the midst of a really stressful time. They were really keen for us to get this information out, and I hope it's going to be helpful to them. And the work was funded by SIF funds from Plant and Food Research, and also want to acknowledge help from New Zealand Apples and Pears with the design of the project. Thank you.